Hello. CinemaSins is quite possibly one of the most influential movie-based YouTube channels of all time. If you're watching something about the state of film criticism on YouTube, be it good or...
Plot holes used to be this thing that only existed in super nerdy movie conversations.
There's a fairly high chance that at some point, CinemaSins will be brought up. And this is despite the fact that CinemaSins' primary focus is comedy rather than film analysis. But are they any good? How many of their sins are accurate? Over the course of the next very long time, I usually record before editing, so I don't know how long this is yet. We're going to be answering that question and more as we assess the writing quality of CinemaSins' video Everything Wrong with Avengers Infinity War. It's going to be a fucking wild ride. For the 3 of you out there who don't already know, CinemaSins is a YouTube channel that makes videos about movies, pointing out mistakes and errors in them. Their videos are formatted as long lists of mistakes. Essentially, this thing is wrong here, that thing is wrong there, that thing over there is also wrong. That was a total of 3 mistakes, or sins as they call them, for this movie. That is the CinemaSins format in a nutshell. They've covered basically every movie under the sun, and today I'm going to be talking about their Infinity War video. Now, before we begin, there are a few things I would like to make clear. And the first thing is that, yes, CinemaSins can be criticised. There is nothing wrong with taking a look at their videos with a critical eye. There seem to be a fair few people who think that because the intention of CinemaSins is comedy, that they don't have to be right about things. That since they're not intending to make any kind of serious film analysis, then if you draw attention to the fact that their videos are filled with frequent inaccuracies, that you're somehow missing the point. This is untrue. It is possible to make a joke where the point of the joke is that you're wrong about something. However, this same thing can't be said as a defense with any joke that has some kind of inaccuracy in it. Sometimes an inaccuracy can just make a joke fall flat. If you need more convincing of this, I've done an entire video on that topic very recently. Plus, I will be bringing this up more when it becomes relevant later on in the analysis. In short, I'm aware that CinemaSins is comedy, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't hold them to the same standards of writing we hold everyone else to. If they misinterpret or misrepresent a movie in order to make a joke about it, and the misinterpretation or misrepresentation isn't part of the joke, that's just lazy writing. You can't just sweep away criticisms of things like that by saying, oh, it's just for comedy. Yeah, okay, it's just for comedy. It's still wrong, though. Okay, the second thing I want to bring up is something really fucking exciting. Get ready for this. Assessment criteria. My initial video about CinemaSins' Infinity War video was something little, something quick, just for fun. By no means was it an attempt to actually assess the quality of the video. I pointed out some mistakes in it, some things I disagreed with, and that was all. But if we're going to take a more in-depth look at everything wrong with Infinity War, we've got to decide what means we'll be judging it by. And I've decided I will be judging each sin on 3 separate criteria. That's not to say I'll be going through these criteria like a checklist. I just want you to know what I have in mind as I'm talking about each of these sins. Criteria 1. Is everything said within the sin accurate? This is the simplest and most basic thing to get right. Now, of course, we're all human, we all make mistakes sometimes. Hell, there's probably a mistake somewhere in this video. I normally correct mistakes in the comments if you want to check. But when a video starts being consistently inaccurate in a way that isn't contributing to the humour, that's when we've got a problem. That's what indicates to us that writing standards are slipping. The second criterion is race. Is race? What? What the fuck? Where did that come from? The second criterion is relevance. Not really sure how I managed to fuck up my words last time, but there we go. Please don't try to dig any deep meanings from that. To meet this criterion, the sin has to be relevant in some way to the film. What Jeremy is saying has to impact the film in some way. If when talking about Infinity War, Jeremy says something along the lines of, this scene is cool and all, but what did Thanos eat for lunch? This is never explained to us. Then that sin would not meet this criterion, because it's not about the film, it's an irrelevant question. Basically at that point, while nothing inaccurate was said in the sin, it doesn't add anything. It's just filler. It serves no purpose beyond bloating the video's runtime. The final criterion is humour. Is the sin funny? Is it a joke? Many of the sins that CinemaSins makes are just in there for comedic purposes, and this is very apparent. If Jeremy talks about something that's completely irrelevant to the film's plot, but it's clearly an attempt at humour, this is fine. The sin is no longer just filler, it's there as a joke. The perfect sin would meet all 3 of these criteria. It would be an accurate and relevant criticism of the film that's presented in a funny way. A perfect CinemaSins video would be all sins like that. But not every sin has to do all 3 of these things. Every sin has to be accurate unless the inaccuracy is part of the joke, but beyond that a sin can either be relevant or humorous. If it's irrelevant but has humour, it's there as a joke. and if it's relevant but has no humour, it's there as a genuine criticism. So in the inverse, everything inaccurate, and everything that's there just as completely humourless filler, I will consider to be to the video's detriment. I understand that these criteria aren't completely universal, but they're the ones I'll be using. Are we all good on that? Okay. The third and final thing I want to bring up before we begin is that a little while ago I was invited onto an episode of EFAP, where I, along with YouTubers Skull on Wheels, Rag, and Arrival at the Greatest Movie of All Time, watched and responded to Everything Wrong with Infinity War live. Throughout this video, I'm going to be cutting in clips from that stream when I feel they're relevant.
But yeah, by the way, because of how terrible our structure is, by the way, yeah, so our guest today is CinemaSins. Hello.
Hi.
I should have opened with that.
Yeah. Hello. You might have noticed the fourth icon.
It's a beautiful
Yeah, the
icon.
only one who doesn't have a Christmas icon. How dare you?
You mean, yes,
Do you
it
have a
does.
Christmas icon? I'm wearing a
It actually doesn't show up for me either, but I see it on the.
I was gonna say, it's on
see it.
screen.
Oh, now I see it. Okay.
I like it.
So you're not perpetuating the war against Christmas. That's good.
War
It's
against
a war, Rhino.
Wakandans.
It's a
Yeah,
war for Christmas.
War for
Does that mean
Christmas.
the rhinos were fighting for Christmas against Black Panther?
I'm gonna go with yes.
Panther.
Those clips are either going to be there to punctuate points, or just to provide a little bit of extra entertainment. I'll add a link to the full stream in the description. But now we're ready to start talking about the video. Sin 1. It's time for Sin 1.
Even for giving the 9 seconds of black screen, this logo takes up 34 seconds for one goddamn studio.
It's the logo sin, because let's be honest, of course it is. For those unaware, this is one of the most common kinds of sin in CinemaSins videos.
45 seconds of Incredible logos, 41 seconds of logos, 42 seconds of Disney logos, 37 seconds of Sony logos 69 each other, Milestone logo.
This kind of sin is, for the most part, relatively inoffensive fluff. The main criticism I could see being thrown at this sin would be for its repetitiveness, but even then, it's usually accurate and it only takes up like 3 seconds. I do think that people who I see describing this as a running joke will probably be really impressed when they hear like an actual joke that has like comedy in it. Like it is a running something, yeah, but it's not a joke. They're not trying to make you laugh with that one. At least, you know, I hope they're not. Would be kind of embarrassing if they were. But at their best, studio logos can really set up the tone for a film. They can get you into the right mood before the first scene has even played. The logos in Infinity War do this brilliantly, replacing the usual Marvel fanfare with a distress call from the Asgardians, undercut with the more sinister music that usually accompanies Thanos. This is something that CinemaSins usually ignores, and yes, they do ignore it for Infinity War. However, the fact that they're ignoring this doesn't make them wrong about anything. You could definitely argue that they're oversimplifying things, but when it comes down to it, they're clearly not angling this as some kind of serious criticism, so overall, I'm gonna say that this is fine. Okay, so we're now 8 minutes into the video, and we've covered a total of 1 out of 128 sins in the CinemaSins video. I've never even heard of Mauler, I don't know what you're talking about. Sin 2, the second of the sins. Okay, Sin 2. He starts his second sin by saying,
Thanos supposedly kills half of the people he encounters. So is this half of what was left of Asgard? Because it looks like a whole lot more.
and while this floor does have a fair few more corpses on it than the average floor, we don't see anywhere near the number of corpses it would take to constitute more than half of the survivors of Asgard. At the end of Ragnarok, we see a huge hall, basically full of people. Then, after Thanos shows up, we see about 16 bodies on the floor of the Asgardian ship. 16 is definitely significantly less than half of the Asgardian population at this point. We also later get a scene where Thor confirms that only half of his people were killed at the hands of Thanos. The line is, "He stole the space stone from me when he destroyed my ship and slaughtered half my people." Sorry, I had to do that one myself. I could only find the scene in Hindi for some reason.
हो सकता है वो टीम में हो मैं बहुत वक्त से गया नहीं
Basically, this is just something that kind of sounds like it could be right, as long as you don't really put any thought into it. This inaccuracy also isn't there to benefit a joke, because there's no joke in this line. It's delivered as a straightforward criticism, but it's incorrect. He then, in the same sin, goes on to say this.
I'm also wondering, since Asgard lost so many at the hands of Kate Blanchett in Thor Part 3, does Thanos update what constitutes 50% population of a planet? Or should we give him a pass, since he couldn't possibly know the devastation Asgard just went through?
This is also pretty clearly not for comedy. I mean, where in that line was the joke? But let's go ahead and actually break down what he's saying here. First of all, he asks whether or not Thanos updates what constitutes half of a population. Since his motivation is very clearly laid out as him wanting to conserve life, and his method of doing this is to try and prevent civilizations from running out of resources by cutting their their population in half, then considering that motivation, it would make sense for him to update what constitutes half of a population if that population recently went through a massive reduction in numbers. However, it would only really make sense for Thanos to update what constitutes 50% of a population if they still had the same amount of resources that they had before their population drop, which the Asgardians definitely don't because their entire fucking planet was destroyed. They have nothing anymore. Thanos probably also does know that Asgard was destroyed, because it's fairly reasonable for us to assume he was keeping track of the Space Stone, which was in Asgard's vault at the time of its destruction. And even if he didn't know that, he knows that the Asgardians are refugees, and most likely don't have a home or any resources of their own besides what they have on their ship. But if Thanos does know about the Asgardian tragedy, then he knows about their population drop and their loss of resources. If he doesn't know what happened, then he doesn't know about either of those things and can't take either factor into account. Either way, this behaviour doesn't contradict his motivations as far as we understand them. This is another one of those nitpicks that kind of sounds reasonable when you first hear it, but when you actually give it some thought, you realise the only reason it sounds like it makes sense is because CinemaSins, deliberately or otherwise, have cherry-picked the evidence they're taking into account when they make this claim. Sin number three,
The Tesseract, or your brother's head.
This 2-hour and 30-minute incomplete movie where Thanos locates all the Infinity Stones is only necessary so that Thanos can snap half the universe's population to death, just so he can be lazy. All this trouble he's going through to find Infinity Stones. He could have traveled planet to planet and did this job faster, like 6 years ago when we were introduced to him in the first Avengers.
So there are two possible interpretations of this sin. I'm going to cover both of them, starting with the one I see being made most often.
You know what? You think it would be faster to go to every individual fucking planet and have an individual war on every single planet in the universe?
Now, I don't think that Jeremy is actually saying that he thinks it would have been faster for Thanos to go to every single planet and kill half of the population on each planet himself. Collecting all of the Infinity Stones and using the Infinity Gauntlet to snap away the universe's population instantly is definitely going to be a more effective solution. You know, just considering that the universe is so a wee bit big, you know, it's quite large. Probably take a while to go and have a war on literally every planet that's populated. So let's just disregard that interpretation, because if that is what he's saying, he's very clearly very wrong. And move on to the second interpretation. That is, Jeremy is wondering why Thanos didn't do this sooner. Why Thanos has waited until now to collect the Infinity Stones. Well, we don't really know what Thanos has been doing up until this point. We've not actually seen a huge amount of him, but we do know that Thanos has been gearing up to collect the Infinity Stones himself since the end credit scene of Age of Ultron.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
So is it really reasonable that he's taken so long since then to actually get started on this plan? We do have very limited information about what he's been doing all this time, but let's for a moment take into consideration what we actually do know. Well, we know that most of the Infinity Stones are heavily guarded. In fact, the Space Stone was even in the Asgardian Vault, a place we've been led to believe is incredibly secure, and it has stayed there right up until just before Thanos went and started going to collect all the Infinity Stones. I wonder if those two things are connected in any way. We also find out that basically no one even knows where the Soul Stone is, and that Thanos sent Gamora to find out where it was before he lost contact with her. Basically, going and collecting all of these stones definitely isn't going to be something that you can just sort of decide to do and then just do immediately. If you want to succeed, it's definitely going to take some research and preparation beforehand. I mean, you want to steal 6 of the most securely guarded things in the universe. Basically, the fact that we haven't actually seen much of what Thanos has done up until this point doesn't mean that deciding he's just been sitting on his ass not really doing anything is a reasonable assumption to make. This movie leads us to believe that he's been doing research and making preparations so that when the time comes to actually execute his plan, he can do it effectively.
Timeline-wise, it makes enough sense. I'm not sure where exactly the contradictions would lie. Like, is the complaint that he wasn't fast enough from what we know?
It's like, people are saying, why didn't he do this sooner? Like, the same question is just like, why didn't anyone do anything sooner? It's like, this is just how long it took him.
If he had lost, I might have agreed with him, but he still wins. Like, what difference does it make?
There is an old Chinese proverb that says, measure twice, cut once.
I don't know what that means, but I agree.
Someone in the chat said, why didn't Thanos just fly the Eagles to Endor?
Sin Thor. This one's about Thor, so...
If Thor doesn't send Loki down into Odin's trophy room at the end of Thor the Third, does the Tesseract survive it and float around in space? And does Thanos' quest end when he realizes he can't possess the Space Stone? Does the snap only produce impotent sparks at that point? It's a hypothetical, I grant, but I'm sinning it anyway.
What would happen if the movie was completely different?
What would happen if something else happened?
So this really isn't a joke or a criticism, it's just sort of a random hypothetical question. They're really easy to ask. It's just like, what if Thanos died before the start of this movie? Then the events could never happen. There you go, there's another completely random hypothetical for you. The real question is, what does this add to the video? Well, as outlined in my assessment criteria in the beginning, this is what I would consider to be filler.
You padding the sin count, bro? I think you're padding the sin count.
But beyond that, not only is it filler, it's also really inaccurate and clearly hasn't taken loads of the information that the film has actually given us into consideration. First of all, the answer to this question is very obvious and quite simple. If in Thor Ragnarok Loki had never gone to the Asgardian vault, Asgard wouldn't have been destroyed, since he only goes down there to place Surtur's head into the eternal flame, thus destroying Asgard. Meaning that the Space Stone would still just be sitting in that vault. Just being guarded by Hela now, I guess. But on top of that, even if Asgard was still destroyed with the Space Stone in the vault, and we're assuming that that definitely would destroy the Space Stone, then we know from what we see in this movie that Thanos would still be able to get it because he just used the Time Stone to get it back. Basically, this sin clearly just hasn't had any thought put into it. Sin number 5.
We have the Hulk. Why does Hulk hold back during the battle while Thanos destroys the Asgardian ship until the end when Loki says we have a Hulk? What the fuck was he doing before then?
While it could be assumed that Hulk is just sort of transforming in that time, there's nothing in the movie that even hints at an explanation to this. The fact that nearly the entire battle seems to have come to an end, but Thanos still doesn't know Hulk is there, does kind of give off the impression that Hulk was just sort of waiting for his cue. So this one isn't a joke, but it is totally valid criticism. So let's move on to Sin 6. Fuck it.
Thanos destroys Hulk with only one stone in his glove. Later, with many stones in the glove, his punch will be held by super angry Captain America, after going toe-to-toe with Iron Man on Titan for a good bit. And the power distribution / comparisons in the MCU have never felt more squirrely than in this movie.
So this one still isn't a joke. Still no jokes yet. Guys, it's just for comedy, okay? The CinemaSins is just for comedy. That's why there's inaccuracies. It's just for comedy. That's the excuse for these being wrong. But let's break this one down hero by hero. The first thing he says is that Thanos obliterates Hulk with only one stone. But once he has almost all of the stones, his punch will still be blocked by Cap. First of all, the stones are completely irrelevant here because he doesn't use any of the stones against Cap. Secondly, what Cap blocks from Thanos isn't a punch. Thanos just sort of reaches out to him and then immediately lays him out with a single punch. This really doesn't throw off the power balance at all. Hulk is still very clearly much stronger than Cap physically. Basically, the sin has already got a fair amount of inaccuracy in it, but when we do move on to Tony, things do get a little more complicated. His point about Iron Man is basically the same. Tony shouldn't be able to hold his own against Thanos if Thanos defeated Hulk as quickly as he did. Plus, in the fight against Iron Man, Thanos actually uses the stones. It does seem like the movie is actually suggesting that Tony is better at taking on Thanos than Hulk is, and Jeremy is saying that that shouldn't be the case. But should it? In the MCU version of the continuity, should Tony Stark be able to put up a better fight than Hulk can, with his bleeding edge armor? Really, this is a topic that could be big enough for its own video, but I'm just going to go over the basics pretty quickly. Starting with evidence in favor of Tony having a higher power level than the Hulk in the MCU. Tony managed to go toe-to-toe with the Hulk for fucking ages in Age of Ultron. Granted, in highly specialized armor. In this fight, he eventually comes out on top. Since that fight, Tony's armor has become much more powerful, whereas the Hulk's power level has presumably remained constant. Finally, it's not just brawn that's important in this fight, it's also brain. When Thanos takes on Hulk, it doesn't just come down to brute strength. Thanos actually puts in the effort to counter a lot of Hulk's blows, and Hulk doesn't do the same against Thanos. Tony, on the other hand, puts in the effort to preempt, block, and counter many of Thanos' attacks, while also trying harder to be unpredictable in his own attacks instead of just throwing his brawn at Thanos. Now let's have some evidence against. Thanos actually uses his stone's abilities against Tony. This isn't something he does against the Hulk. Also, Tony may have beaten the Hulk in Age of Ultron, but he only did that while wearing highly specialized armor. Now, there's clearly evidence on both sides of this one, so I've just decided to present that evidence to you so you can decide where you stand on this sin.
So long as you understand that the comics are a separate continuity from the films.
Overall, half of this sin is downright dumb, and the other half is debatable. It's time for Sin 7.
Also, where's Valkyrie? Valkyrie should have at least been shouted out in this movie. Thank Odin, Valkyrie got half my people away to safety, is all Thor had to say later.
This sin is all good. It's not a joke, but it does express a legitimate concern shared by many of the fans. It doesn't come across as super serious film criticism, and it doesn't have to, that's fine. I mean, I would also like to know where Valkyrie is. Sin 8. Look at me, I speak not English.
Just who the is this guy? We've sat through 18 goddamn films, and if I'm remembering correctly, 75% of the MCU has been Thanos bitching about traffic on the freeway, and we haven't once been introduced to these powerful that follow him around or why he needs them.
So this one doesn't appear to have any real attempt at humour in it, but it also isn't inaccurate. We haven't been introduced to any of these characters before now. On the other hand, this line,
75% of the MCU has been Thanos bitching about traffic on the freeway,
strikes me as maybe a little bit of an over-exaggeration. 75% of the MCU is Thanos bitching about traffic on the freeway? That's incredible, considering prior to this we only had 4 scenes of him, the longest of which was 40 seconds. Spread across 18 films. 75%! It does seem though that the implication being made by Jeremy in this sin is that the introduction we're given to these characters is somehow inadequate, that the MCU should have introduced these characters prior to this film. Now, I'd say the introduction we're given to the children of Thanos in this film is totally adequate. It's easy enough to understand who these people are and what their relation to Thanos is, at least within the context of the story of the film. Or to put it another way, we get given all of the information we need to understand their role in the story. For that reason, this sin does come across as something that's not being said because they think it's a valid nitpick, but just because this is a nitpick channel and they need to come up with enough nitpicks to fill a full-length video. Now, CinemaSins totally could just want to see more of these characters, and that's absolutely fine. That said, the implications put forward by this sin are highly disagreeable. While the MCU definitely could have done more to introduce these characters beforehand, I will quite confidently say it didn't need to do that. Overall, this sin is very clearly on some very thin ice. Next sin. We're getting through these really slowly. We are getting through them though.
Sure, put Infinity Stone retrieval in the hands of your henchmen. That worked so well in the 39 other movies. Didn't you literally grumble, fine, I'll do it myself?
You know what? I do believe he did say that. So in this sin, Jeremy is saying that Thanos shouldn't be depending on henchmen for stone retrieval, at least when you consider his past experiences when he's tried to get other people to get stones for him. However, there are 2 things that CinemaSins just fails to take into account here. The first thing, which isn't entirely a counter on its own, is that Thanos clearly trusts these people more.
Well, clearly he trusts these guys more. That's what I was always thought. Children of Thanos, right? Loki and Ronan weren't children of Thanos.
His relationship with Loki has never really been clear, since we don't actually see them on screen together until... But his relationship with Ronan was essentially one of mutual benefit. You get the stone for me, I'll do something for you. His relationship with the children of Thanos seems to be very different. They seem to share in his ideals and look up to him.
Be thankful that your meaningless lives are now contributing to the balance.
Earth is closed today.
This makes it much less likely that they'll pull a Ronan and end up betraying Thanos. However, this doesn't mean they won't pull a Loki and just fail to retrieve the stones. But that's when the second thing that CinemaSins failed to take into account comes into play. And this second thing I consider to be far more important. Thanos is in no way depending on his henchmen to deliver the stones to him. They're just there for extra help. Thanos actually is going around to all of the stones and collecting them himself, but he can't be in 2 places at once, at least not in this continuity. So he just sends his children to one place while he goes somewhere else, with the intention of joining them in that place later. As a matter of fact, the children of Thanos don't succeed in bringing him any of the stones. But this doesn't end up mattering, and Thanos still succeeds, because he knows not to rely on henchmen.
Sure, put Infinity Stone retrieval in the hands of your henchmen.
He's not putting anything in their hands, he's just utilizing their help, something that he has no reason not to do. He is the only person he's actually depending on. Basically, this sin only takes one piece of information into account, while completely disregarding context and all the evidence that goes against it. Sin 10, we're finally in double digits. Yay! Only 100 more to go.
Oh no, Loki's gonna die again, like in Thor the Dark World, which definitely means he's probably not dead. And even if he is, I'm sinning it anyway, because that Dark World scene did not get sinned enough.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong here. Killing off a character and then bringing them back multiple times really can take away the impact from subsequent deaths. This still isn't a joke, I don't think we've had any jokes yet, but it is a valid criticism. Sin Nummer 11. That was German. I don't know what to do in these.
In previous movies, we were told Hulk and Banner have different memories, so how does Banner remember the Hulk alone knows?
Now, it has been established that Banner and Hulk can struggle to remember things that happened to the other one.
You're Banner's friend.
I'm not Banner's friend, I prefer you.
I don't even like the Hulk. I prefer you.
I mean, Banner didn't even know who Valkyrie was for a very long time. Although, he did say she seemed familiar, suggesting that he does retain some kind of memory. Another thing that suggests that the two clearly retain some kind of memory between each other is his connection with Natasha in Age of Ultron. I'm guessing they probably didn't go out together very much when he was the Hulk, so for him to understand who she is to the extent that he can be calmed down by her, he clearly retains some of the information that Banner has. The thing is though that there have never been clear concrete rules established about what Hulk and Banner can and can't remember. We also don't know that Banner never had any time to learn about Thanos as himself, so him remembering Thanos definitely doesn't contradict anything. On top of that, as he's warning Strange and Wong about Thanos, he's still transforming from the Hulk. You can tell by his voice.
Thanos is coming. He's coming.
This scene basically shows us that he remains focused on this information through his transformation, which serves as a very good reason for him to remember this information specifically. This is another one of those sins that, while there's limited evidence, the evidence that's there kind of stacks up against Jeremy's point. There's certainly not enough evidence in the MCU for him to prove that his point is accurate. Sins 12 and 13. I've grouped these ones up for reasons.
Tony Stark, famous Avenger, is running around Central Park and nobody's bothering him. This guy is more famous than any president or celebrity in history.
Tony Stark?
Do normal people see this shit? While I know New Yorkers are up on their Avengers knowledge, I'm not quite so sure they've been informed about the masters of the mystic arts.
This one is another totally valid criticism. The fact that one of the most famous men in the world is just sort of walking about the place and no one seems to really give a shit, and then on top of that, a literal magic portal opens and no one even gives it a passing glance, kind of seems like an oversight on the part of the filmmakers. You know, it doesn't seem like in the writing room they went, would any of the people be interested in this magic portal? And then someone else went, Nah, I don't really think anyone would give a shit. You know, I for one know that if I saw a literal magic portal open nearby, I probably even wouldn't bother giving it a passing glance, like, Now, I do know that this is a world with, like, aliens and things, but I'm still pretty sure that a magic portal would at least constitute, like, a look from some people. Like, from at least one person, right? Sin 14. I just thought I'd say it normally this time.
Big bangs and 6 elemental crystals hurtling across the virgin universe.
If the universe is infinite, or at least close to it.
Stop! This is just a nitpick in that it doesn't tear down the logic of the sin overall, it's just a small mistake within that sin. But being close to infinite is impossible.
There's no such thing as close to infinite. That just conceptually doesn't work. Either you have infinity or you don't. Even the biggest conceivable object you could possibly imagine is still going to be infinitely smaller than something that's actually infinite.
If the universe is infinite, or at least close to it, then these stones were sent in directions that should have guaranteed...
Close to infinite.
The universe isn't infinite.
Even if it
it's
was.
It's just a little bit shy. If it was just 2 inches more...
It's 2 inches for the left, yeah, it'd be infinite.
Big bangs and 6 elemental crystals hurtling across the virgin universe.
If the universe is infinite, or at least close to it, then these stones were sent in directions that should have guaranteed no one could ever combine them all, just based on sheer math.
This one is a bafflingly strange claim. Jeremy is saying that if the stones were chucked across the universe by the Big Bang, they would be so far apart by now that no one could ever go and collect them back together. But we know very little about the actual creation of the stones.
There were 6 singularities. Then the universe exploded into existence, and the remnants of these systems were forged into concentrated ingots. Infinity Stone.
And we have no reason to assume that the speed at which they were sent flying was faster than the rest of the universe was expanding. But let's for a moment assume that since the inception of the universe, all 6 Infinity Stones had been going at the fastest possible speed they could be going in opposite directions of each other. Would this mean that it's impossible for anyone to collect all 6 of them again? No, the Space Stone allows you to teleport literally anywhere instantly, so... It's been long since established in the MCU that there are ways to travel incredibly fast, like the Bifrost. There are portals. The distance between the stones makes no difference when you have portals, Jeremy! This sin fuck it, let's keep that taken. This sin gets a big thumbs down from me. Alright, that's everything I'm going to cover for part 1 of this series. This dissection of CinemaSins. I have of course put in a lot of work to make sure I'm being absolutely fair and to make sure that I'm making as few mistakes as possible, but if I have made any mistakes, please let me know and I'll amend anything I've got wrong in the comments and in part 2. I'm not sure how often I'm going to be releasing episodes of this series, but I'm hoping to get the whole thing done in maybe 3 or 4 parts. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you're looking forward to the next part of this series, and I'll see you on Sunday. Goodbye.